Today we'll be following, or I'll be following along with the help file. We do have an updated stakeholder management help file that I'll be loading into Unifier later today. It's not in there now, but I will show you or remind everyone where to access that. But this has been updated with a lot more detail and instruction than the current version. And so I will be going through this. A couple things I want to point out from a user management perspective, and a reminder that we're using user management to add new users to projects, also to communicate any kind of permissions issues that we feel like we need to add some sort of access or change someone's access. And then also removing users from the project, as well as reassigning projects where we have the case of a project gets changed to a new PM or project coordinator. When a project is first created in Unifier, it's already populated with some of the users that you'll need. So the project coordinator, you'll already be in the project coordinators group. If the PM and or the planner was noted on the request application, they will also be in the project in their groups. But the first thing we want to do is double check that just to make sure. The help file lists all of the groups that kind of come in, list the groups that you need to manage, meaning that any other group is kind of default. So examples of that are the reviewers. So any reviewer loaded into Unifier is automatically loaded into every project and available for review. So document review, RFIs, submittals, etc. And then a lot of the standard approvers. And what I mean by that is like Chris Ewing, Mike Turman, they're always the same role in all projects. It never changes. Whereas a project manager will change from project to project. So one of the things we're going to do is update this help file with a list of those groups as well. What it lists now, again, are just the groups that you'll be needing to manage. So again, at start, it's going to have the project coordinator and then all of the standard users. What it may be missing is your client, your project manager, your planner. Oh, and Catherine reminded me that if Mike Turman is going to be signing a funding request, he will not automatically be added to the client group because he's not necessarily doing that for every project. So sorry, that is the one exception for Mike there. Okay, so when your project's first created, it's a good idea to go in and validate that your project manager or planner is already loaded and in the correct group. So right now I'm in my training project in UAT. I'm actually a project coordinator in this project, so I have the same access rights and limitations as all of you. So to see our users and groups in Unifier, that is done in the admin mode. So you'll see the little blue man icon. When it's gray, that means you're in user mode. And then if you hover over it, you can switch to admin mode. When you do that, it will stay blue to let you know that you're in admin mode. And then of course, now we see different things here on our left-hand navigation tree. The most important for today's training is user management. So again, when your project is first created, it's a good idea just to double check the PM and planner in groups. So users will list all users that have been added to the project. Now this is different in our training environment because we don't necessarily have everyone loaded. So you'll see in production a lot more users. And of course, we want to be able to get into all of your projects if you ever get stuck from a training perspective. So you'll see all of us listed, like myself and Lainey and Catherine and Lori and B and Phil. Now you can see what groups a user are in by double clicking to open them up and then checking the users tab, or sorry, the groups tab. You can't modify their groups, but that's kind of an easy way to check their current group assignment. Now I'm going to go to groups, which is located just below users. Groups, you'll always see the same list of groups for all projects. If you ever see one that's at the bottom that says removed, you can just ignore it. It's not one we're using. We can't delete it. Okay. So we can't delete groups. So if there's ever a group that we decided to rename or get rid of, it's just going to be kind of sitting at the bottom because Unifier doesn't give us a way to delete those. But they aren't, we do remove all their permissions. And so even if you put somebody in this group, they wouldn't have access to anything. So I'm going to open up my project managers group just to see who's in there. Now, you'll probably have people in your project managers group in training because we've pre-populated all your training projects with folks. So, and again, your project manager will be here if you've indicated them on the request application. So it's a good idea to check that. And then similarly, I'm just going to hit cancel. Check your planners. The members tab lists the users that belong to the group. And of course, we can add users to the group as well. So if the users are already in the project, and by that I mean if the user is listed here under users. Not all Unifier users will be in all projects. So if they are listed here, then of course we can add them to groups as needed. But in most cases, you'll actually need to add that user to the project first. So it's a kind of a multi-step process, which I know can be a little bit complex, but we'll run through a couple of scenarios. The other important group is, of course, clients. Chances are you'll have Lori in yours as well. Now the clients group, this is used for certain approvals, most notably the project charter and the funding request. So anybody who needs to approve the project charter or funding request should be added in here. So some projects will have multiple clients, and we have updated those workflows to allow you to select which client it's going to. So previously we had an issue where, you know, it would just go to the entire clients group, and that might not necessarily be appropriate, especially for funding requests when each funding request should only be going to one client. So you can load the clients group with all of your clients, and then in the business process workflows, just select the client that you need to approve that particular funding request or project charter. Oh, looks like we got a question on, is it possible to CC another person in the clients group? That is specific to the workflow and how we have it configured. Since all clients will belong to all project users, I think in a lot of places in the workflow, we allow you to notify anyone. So in those cases, they would be available to CC, but it might be limited in other steps of the workflow. It really depends on the business process. Okay. So, all right, we've come in, we've checked our PM, our planner, our clients. Those are kind of the key groups. Now let's go through and add a project manager to our project. So you may have already have someone in your project managers group when you opened it up, but for today's training, we're going to pretend that no one was in there. So I'm going to click on the Blue Man Group icon here and return to user mode. I accidentally clicked it twice, so be wary of that. Okay. One other thing I will point out before I go to user management is the directory, because this is another way to see users and groups. Now, as project coordinators, you have access to see it in admin mode. But I know we get some questions from PM sometimes. How can I tell who's in what group? This directory actually shows it as well. Now it's a little bit confusing because it shows them all mixed together. So I always recommend that they switched to groups first. And then from there, they can expand a particular group. So if they wanted to see who was in clients, they can hit the plus sign and see who's in the clients group. All right, so I'm going to add a new user. So under stakeholder management, I will find the user management business process. A reminder that you can always access the help file from the little question mark here. I believe in earlier versions of Unifier, you had to have a record and you'd have to get the help file from the record, but Oracle has added a little help button right on the log view so you can access the help file even if you don't have a record yet, which is handy. Again, the current one that's loaded in there is the old one. I will have the new help file loaded by the end of today. That will be in production and the training environment, so you'll see it in both places. So I'm going to go ahead and click create. I'm going to see 4 different options. I'm going to briefly recap each of these. So add existing user, this means I'm going to add an existing Unifier user to my project. That means I didn't see them in my list of users in admin mode, but I know or suspect that they're a Unifier user, and I'll show you how to confirm that in a minute. The second option is add user. This is when we're adding a new user who has never been in Unifier. We don't have vendors in the system yet, but when we do, this will get used more often. And this allows the administrators to then generate a new user and add them to your project. Inactivate user is used to remove users from your project. So in the case that somebody's left the company or left the university, or we've got a project where we're swapping out the PM or PC, this is how we will remove them. Currently, it's a request to the administrators and they will inactivate them. We are looking to upgrade Unifier soon. And one of the enhancements in the new version will actually allow you to inactivate users yourself. And the last one is update user. This will probably be used the least frequently, but in the case where you've added a user to your project and you've added them to the proper group, but for whatever reason, they still don't have access to what they need, we would use this workflow then to tell the administrators who the user is, what groups you've added them to, and what access they still need. And then they would determine if there's another group they should belong to, or escalate if we need to change permissions. I see a question about transferring projects. So we will be covering that in the training. So I don't want to answer that yet because I'll answer that when we cover that. So the first one we're going to go through is adding an existing user. Again, reminder, this means that we know we need them in our project, but we didn't see them in the user list when we were in admin mode. So down here, it's going to pre-populate our request type and allow us to add additional details, such as which groups or roles the user will have in the system. So I'm just going to put in here adding project manager. It's not a required field, but it just allows us to note and document what we're doing, and then also communicate to the administrators what's going on. There's a user details tab, and this is where we'll actually select the user. So I'm going to go ahead and click add. You'll see there's a bunch of information that's grayed out. So this is going to change based on the workflow you select. So because I selected add existing user, it's not going to ask me to enter all of the user information because that's already stored in Unifier. And so those fields are read-only. And I'm not inactivating one or updating anyone, so those fields are read-only as well. And then from here, I can type to search. So you can type any part of their name. It doesn't necessarily have to be the start of their name. I could do part of their middle name and they would still show up. You can also use the select button on the far right to pull up the full list of users. There's 133 in training. I'm guessing there's more in production. And then here it's sorted by first name, so you can kind of scroll and find who you need, or use the find on page to search any of the columns. And then highlight and select. I'll stick with my original. So feel free to select anybody in training, or select yourself as the project manager. Now, if you don't see anybody, if you don't see who you're looking for in that list, that means that they are not a Unifier user, or they might have been and then they have since been inactivated. So if you don't see who you need in that list, you would just close this window to cancel and then use the add user workflow. Okay, so all I'm doing is selecting who it is, hit save. Now you'll notice I also have the option to save and add new. Now for a project manager, chances are you're only going to have one. But if you needed to add multiple clients, you could actually do that in one record. So if I was adding 3 clients, I could add 3 line items and list all 3 clients. And that way it's just one request. I don't have to do 3 separate requests. If you are doing that, you'll probably just want to list all 3 here as well, or just note that you're adding the 3 clients for this project. And then, yes, Catherine, that's a good point. So this is not restricted to one group either. You can actually add everybody you need to the group all in one request. You'll just have to be careful and pay attention to who you've got added in this list, because once the administrators add them to your project, it comes back to you. Or sorry, once the system adds them to your project, it'll come back to you. And then for each person listed, you'll have to go through and make sure you add them to the all project users group and then add them to their appropriate group. But to your question, Catherine, yes, you can add multiple people from multiple groups. So you could add your project manager, your planner, and all your clients all in the same record. And if you do have a client who is not going to be signed on anything, meaning they're not approving any funding requests or the project charter, you can add those details in the details box, but you still need to add them to the all project users group. And I would go ahead and add them to the clients group as well, because in the business process, you're selecting who it's sending to. So even if you're never going to send them an approval, they can still be in the clients group. And that way they have the proper access as a client. Okay, so I've added my existing user or users. I'm going to go ahead and click send. The workflow action will default to add existing user to project, and it's going to come straight back to you for user administration. So what's happening here is when this gets sent back to you in workflow, in the background, the system is adding the user to the project. And so that's why we have this step to send it to yourself, because that is allowing the system to add the user to your project. Now, Jess wasn't in my project previously, so after I hit send, my record was created successfully. So my status is pending user administration, which just means it's at that user administration step currently. The user administration step is just the step for us to assign those users to their proper groups. I also get a task for the same thing. I can take action on my task from either location. So I see I have a user management task, add existing user for that has been sent for user administration. So what I would want to do here is open that up and double check who is included so I can validate that they've been added. In this case, for my example, there was only one, so it's unlikely I would forget who I added, but it's just good to double check. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that to the side. If you have multiple monitors, it's easier just to plop it on another monitor, but it's kind of nice to have that list. If it's only one, you don't need it because you can remember it, or you can just jot it down on a piece of paper. But what I'm going to do is switch back to admin mode. Oh, it's going to close it on me. Sorry about that. Well, you can take a screenshot or write it down on paper. But by switching to admin mode, we're going to go to user administration and users to make sure that the system did what we asked it to, which was to add that user to our project. Now, all it's doing is adding the user to the project. It's not telling the project what groups that person belongs to, and so that's our next step. So then we'll go to groups, now that we noted our user or users have been added to the project. And then for each user in our request, for this example, there was only one. We're going to add them to the all project users group. So anybody you ever add will always be added to the all project user group. That gives them a base level of access in the system. And we'll do that by going to the members tab and clicking on add, which pulls up our user list. And from here, we'll see all those same users that we just saw over here, including our new user. Since all users will always belong, so everybody in your project will always belong to that all users group, you don't necessarily need to pick out who you just added. You can just select everyone and hit add, because we always want everybody in the project in the all users group. So I'll hit OK, which adds them to the group, and then I will hit OK again to close the group and apply the change. Now, we also need to add our new users to their appropriate role. In this case, project manager. So I need to also open up the project manager group. And then from the members tab, add our new project manager by highlighting them in the list and then clicking add, which brings them down to the selected users in the group. Just ignore anybody who's already in there. We're going to pretend we just have our new one, and then click OK, which adds them to the group. And then we'll click OK again. And we'll get a new error I haven't run into before. That's interesting. All right, I'm just going to hit cancel and go back to members. Okay, so this was an error we ran into previously that we thought was resolved. Or actually, it might be that it's resolved in the new upgrade. But if you get that error, just reopen the group, because every time we've run into it, that user is still added to the group. But I'll double check. I'm fairly certain that it's fixed in the new version. But all right, my new user's there. I hit cancel. I reopen project managers. They're still there, so we're okay. And if you're ever unsure, of course, the other way to check is just to open up the user themselves and check their groups tab. And so here's my new user. I can see she's been added to project managers and all project users. Okay, so now we've performed the user administration portion of our task, so we can switch back to user mode by using the Blue Man group. Because tasks was the last thing I looked at before I switched to user mode, it's the first thing I see when I come back. And now I can reopen my task and close it out. So I will hit accept. And I will see a new box down here, comments for users. If you want to communicate anything to the new users that have been added, you can add that there. But note that it's going to be the same comment for everyone you have listed. So if you did add multiple people, they're all going to see the same comment. So for today, especially because Jess is not in the training, I'm just going to say that this was a practice project for training, and to please ignore. Or ignore it, I guess, is the proper grammar. And then we'll go ahead and click send. And you'll, and the workflow action pre-populates to notify user. And so from here, we can then add those users. So they'll get a notification and an email, including that comment. So it's just a way to let them know that they've been added to the project, and provide any additional instruction. You don't have to CC them, but if you do not add them to the CC, they will not get an email or a notification. So actually, let me see if, nope. I should have CC'd myself, so I could have shown you the email. But if you did add yourself and CC yourself, you should be getting a notification from the system. Okay, so that's adding an existing user. And now adding a new user is a similar process. I'm not going to walk through the full workflow for the sake of time, but I do just want to point out what's different. So when you click add user and go to user details and click add, now those other fields are available and required. This selected user, if existing, is still available for me if I want to double check if they're in the system. Like I'm fairly certain they're new to Unifier, but let me double check. And then if they're not, just go ahead and fill in their first name, last name, title, and contact information, as well as their company. This is important for, and I think we do have UCB as a company, at least in production. Yes. So if they're a university employee, you can select UCB. If they were a vendor, you would select their company, and that allows B and Phil to make sure they get created under the appropriate company. You will you may not have their identity and username. So you can write TBD because that might need to be requested as part of the process, and the administrator will put that information in. Partner user, you can leave this or answer it. The important part here is if they're not a UCB, if they're not a university employee, they will be a partner user. Sorry, Catherine, I'm going to unmute you so I can get some context on your question here.
I thought our process was we have to request the identity before we do this. Add a new user.
Yeah, I might be following the old. Request the user after this. Yep. And the process for requesting that, is everybody familiar with requesting an identity?
Yes.
Okay. All right, previous statement amended. You will request the identity prior to entering this into Unifier. That is noted in the updated help file. So if you are following the help file, you will see that in there. So that request will need to be completed before you can fill this out. All right, so once you've filled out the information and hit save, instead of coming right back to you, it will go to the administrators group and they will go ahead and create a Unifier user. The record will then be sent back to you for user administration, and just like adding an existing user, you'll find the new user in your users list and you'll be able to add them to their appropriate groups. All right, next I'm going to go through the workflow for removing a user. But before I do that, one important thing to note is I just added a project manager to my group, so I also need to update my project information. So under information general is our project information. Anytime you add a PMPC planner, it's good to come in here. It's important to come in here and update your project information so we have the correct project manager. So I'm going to clear out Catherine, but my new project manager should now show up in my list and I can submit, which will update my project information with the new project manager, which also updates the project details. Okay, back to user management. So let's say, let's see, who do I want to remove from the project? I'm gonna remove Lainey from the project. Sorry, Lainey. The first thing we do is actually not create. We're not going to create our user management record yet. First, we want to validate that they don't have any current tasks. Because if we remove them from the project or inactivate them, their tasks will be stuck with them. They won't be able to complete it. And if the task has only been assigned to them, then nobody will be able to complete it. We'll need to get an administrator involved to sort it out. But to check who has tasks, you can switch to admin mode again. And then under user administration is task reassignment. And then just click on active user tasks. So inactive user tasks will show any tasks that have been assigned to a user who is now inactive. So the reason we check this first is to make sure that never happens. So we're checking the active users because we haven't removed them or inactivated them. And then from the assignee, we can see who's been assigned. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. So we see this RFI here, RFI 00005. We see it listed twice. That means that this task has been sent to 2 people. Let me double check to see if I've accepted that task here. Bear with me just a moment. I'm going to switch here and switch back. Okay, so I don't know if you saw that, but once I accepted the task, it's only listed once now with me. So in the case of RFI 4, where it's, let's say I was going to remove myself from this project, Lori can still pick up this task, so this is not an issue for this record. Likewise with 3 or 1, but 2, I'm the only one currently assigned. So we're going to have an issue. Same with 5. And then there's the case where like your working budget's going to be sitting out there forever, but I think that sits with the PM and the PC. So as long as you see somebody assigned to that one record that's still going to be hanging out in the project, it's okay to leave it. But if we need to reassign, and I'm going to use RFI2 as an example. So I know I'm going to remove Lainey, and so she doesn't have any tasks, so it's not very exciting. I can't show you anything. So I'm just going to reassign this one that's to myself. So by hitting reassign, let's add Phil. So, I mean, if it was a new project manager, a new project coordinator, you could just go through and update all of their tasks and reassign them from the existing PC to the new PC. Likewise with the PM. And as far as tasks with consensus approval, you're just replacing that one user. So whoever the new person is would have to take action on that task. Or Catherine, is your question more what happens when you've got consensus approval for 3 people, one person's leaving the project, and now only 2 people need to approve? That is an excellent question, because I don't think you can reassign it to somebody else who already has the task. Let me try it out quick. So RFR4 is assigned to me and Lori. Let's see if I can just reassign my task to Lori. No, I can't. So there we might need to get an administrator involved, because somebody's going to have to take action for that person. I think that case would be rare. But in that event, I think we're going to have to raise an issue and get an admin involved to, so we can have somebody act on that person's behalf. Okay, so a recap: task reassignment will allow us to reassign tasks. So typically when somebody's leaving, they're being replaced by someone else, and we can reassign that task to the new person. In the case that they're leaving and not being replaced, most workflow in Unifier is single approval. So if you see that task listed twice, it's okay to leave it as is, because once Eric Sukup isn't activated, Lori Reed can still take action on it. So you just want to pay attention to that record number to see if there's more than one person assigned. If you do get an error, just hover over the red X. It will tell you why. So in this case, I couldn't reassign the task to Lori because she already has a task for this same. She already has this task. All right. So let's say I came here, Lainey either didn't have any assignments or she just had RFI2 and I've reassigned it to Phil. Now we can go back and create our inactivate record in user management. So I'm going to switch back to user mode. Go to stakeholder management and then user management. and then create. And we'll select inactivate user. So we should come up with a list of which steps are consensus. Typically, review steps in RFI and submittals, when you're sending it to reviewers to mark up an attachment, those are consensus. All right, so create new user management, type is inactivate user. Again, you can use this to remove multiple users if you want. In this case, I'm just going to remove one. And then when we go to user details and click add, we're going to see some different field behavior than in the other workflows. Now we'll see add user details is all read-only. I can collapse that if I want. I have some required fields under inactivate user details. And of course, update user details is still read-only. I can collapse that as well. So I will select the user that we want to inactivate. Sorry, Lainey isn't in this project. Oops. I'm going to select Lori. Actually, sorry, Catherine. You didn't have any tasks, so I'm going to inactivate you. All right, there's some additional questions down here. Whether or not, if you know that the user left their company, whether that's the university or the vendor's company, you'll want to indicate that. If you don't know, leave it blank. But what that does is that will let the administrators know whether or not they need to inactivate that user from Unifier completely, not just this project, because every user occupies a license and that license has a cost. So if they left the company, chances are they're not going to be active in any other projects either, and that would free up a license for someone else. Again, if you're unsure, you can leave it blank. User inactivated in project. So this was built for you to inactivate yourself, but as we know, that's not going to be available until we upgrade. So just go ahead and hit yes, and B and Phil know that they need to do that for you. And this license released, you can leave that empty. That is for B and Phil. They'll be indicating whether or not they've released a license. So I will hit save and send. So it's going to go to the administrators, which in production is just B and Phil and this cloud admin account. Okay. So I see my inactivate user is now in the pending review status. If I check my workflow progress, I can see that it's currently at the access and activity review step. What that means is the admins are going to be running reports to make sure, to see if that user is active in any other projects, or if the user is only in this project and they can free up that license. But if they are active in other projects, they will only inactivate the user in this project. And of course, I have access to the graphic, so I can see what's going to happen next. You'll see there is no, unlike the other workflows, there's no user administration. They will inactivate the user and close. So there's no more step for us other than to make sure it happens. They can send it back to the project coordinator if they have any questions or need a clarification. So I'm going to proxy in as an admin quick to complete that step so you can see it. And we'll update the help file once we have Unifier update and you're able to inactivate folks yourself. And I'll actually quick show, well, I'll do that as the admin so you can see how it's done. And then once we upgrade, you'll have access to do it and we'll update the help file accordingly. But the administrator now gets a task. So you can see I've proxied in as cloud admin. I'm no longer the project coordinator. So I don't see all the tasks I used to see. I just see this user management task. Again, this is what the administrator is doing. So this won't be occurring in your projects for today's training. So they'll accept it. They'll see any notes you added. They'll see who you listed. And they will then inactivate them. So I'll switch to admin mode. So again, this is the step the admin's doing, but after the upgrade, you will also have access to do this. So if I go to Catherine and I go down, I can change their status to inactive. Actually, looks like you were already inactive. Active and inactive are the only statuses we're using for users. We don't have the upgrade scheduled yet. We're waiting to hear back from Oracle with some times that they can upgrade us. So the admin is going to go ahead and update the information here if needed. So if they did release a license, they'll indicate that. Otherwise, send it on to close. Nope. I'll switch back to my project coordinator. So I'm sorry, I'm seeing some of the activity in the chat there, and I apologize. I did. We still do need to remove them from groups. So I'm going to come back into admin mode, go to users. I'll see that Catherine is now inactive. And then from the groups, I would remove her from the groups that she's in. Now, I'm in training and she's in all projects, so, but typically there is only going to be the all project users group that they're in, and then whatever role. Which should be done before the inactivate. Catherine, I'm going to unmute you quick because.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of discussion about, which I think you're now doing, is going back, and so they've sent the inactivation request to B and Phil to make sure they do their part. But doesn't the PC need to then do what you're doing now and remove them from all the groups?
So once a user is inactivated, they will no longer show in the group.
Do we want to remove them from the groups ahead of waiting for B and Phil to inactivate? Because they'll
If
still get email, right?
Correct. Yeah. So if removing them from the groups would prevent that sooner than waiting for that inactivation.
Which I think we should, because it could be a day or two, depending on how busy B and Phil are.
Yeah. Okay, so I see that as a slight change to the help file too, because
Okay.
they'll actually, it's actually a little bit different than we've described it in the help file.
Okay.
Well, I'll update that before.
I have another call. I have to go.
All right. Thanks, Catherine.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. The last thing I wanted to touch on was when we need to reassign a project. So the project transfer process, this is outlined in the help file, which we'll be sending out. But it's essentially a combination of everything that we've done. It's just in a very specific order. In that the current project coordinator will add the new PC and PM to the project. They'll get them added to the project coordinator and project manager groups. So for a short time, there will be more than one person in the PC and PM group. And then if there's any tasks that need to be reassigned from the current PM PC to the new PM PC, you'll do that in task assignment. And then the new PC will inactivate the original PC and PM using that workflow. So unfortunately, we're a little bit out of time to walk through this, but it's the same things that we've already seen. So the PC will use the add existing user and add the new PC and PM. And now that the new PM and PC are in the project, we can reassign existing tasks to them. So anything from the original PM PC, we would just reassign through that task reassignment screen. And then it's the responsibility of the new PC to go ahead and inactivate, remove and inactivate the prior PC PM. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.